Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. We are back in the studio. We've got a awesome show today. I've got a very, very special guest, probably one of the most brilliant minds in technology today. And if you're wondering where he's been hiding at the CDC with all the other diseases we're not supposed to see. But this is going to be a great episode for those cybersecurity practitioners that are thinking of the new wave of technology and hearing all the rumors. We're going to set some records straight, but also set some challenges with it as well. And I'm very excited for today's episode. But before we kind of get going on today's show, I want to give a quick shout out to our friends at Get Smart Eye. All right, guys. So before we kind of get going on today's episode, I want to talk to you about privacy and security, obviously, right? But how many of you guys do what I do? Travel a lot, go work out of coffee shops. You need to get out of it. You need to kind of go brainstorm. You know, you go to your favorite Starbucks, or in my case, my favorite coffee shop here in Atlanta. You sit down, you put in your AirPods, you're listening to your favorite CyberHub Engage or Goodbye Privacy podcast or Journey, if you want to listen to music, and you're having a good time. You're up and away working, going over apps, documents, coding, whatever it is that you do for work, analyzing logs, whatever it is, reading a really important email from your boss, and then all of a sudden you see that person kind of staring at your screen and you go, dude, don't look at my screen. Can't I have some privacy? Well, up until right now, the answer to that would have been, I got to sit in the corner of the coffee shop or the side of the coffee shop to get that. Not anymore. With Get Smart Eye, you don't have to do that anymore. Get Smart Eye is a very cool app that you can use on your phone. It reads your biometrics, so it reads your face. This is how it works. It's looking at your face. So while you're reading a document, it's making sure you're the only person looking at it. Try to put another phone in front of it, take a picture of the document, screen goes black. Someone gets behind you, tries to look at your screen, like that nosy person at Starbucks or wherever, screen goes black. No one can see what you're seeing on your device when you're using Get Smart Eye. So support our friends and my very good friend Dexter, who is not a security guy, who came up with this product on a trip overseas dealing with security guys and went, how come I can see everything you guys see? Isn't that like the complete opposite of security? And he's absolutely right. He's launched this amazing product. So go to getsmarteye.com/James, getsmarteye.com/James, getsmarteye.com/James for a link to download the app and the opportunity to see a free demo of it. This is great for a person, a small business, an enterprise business. If you travel a lot, this is the right app for you. So again, go to getsmarteye.com/James to get access to the app I don't leave home without. And so we're back. I've got Chris Lynberg, and you're kind of, for the CDC, and for those who know, not the hacking group, there's a hacking group from the 80s that was called the CDC. You're with the Center for Disease Control, correct?
Correct. Not the cult of the dead cow.
Not the cult of the dead cow. Although that would have been really cool if you were. You're like, I've always been CDC my whole life. Represent. Like, so sure. But you're the head of IT research and development. You're kind of like the chief digital officer. Micah has a whole different title on the video for you. You do some really, really interesting stuff. We met, and I like to kind of set the tone for the crowd so they know our background. We haven't known each other for very long, but I feel like we've known each other forever because of our phone conversations. They're awesome. And thanks to John McCoy at DataBank for this introduction. We got to give Johnny a shout out. Make sure you tag Johnny in the shout out piece, Micah. I like tagging Johnny and stuff because he's always like, yeah. But he's a great champion of fostering collaboration. And thank you for taking part of our DataBank meetup, Chris, and kind of joining Mark and myself. And I hope it was helpful for you.
It was very insightful. I think we had a great time brainstorming. I consider that a think tank type session. when we're face to face and we're pinging ideas off of everybody. So
yeah, and those ideas will never go public. Our whole point of that group is that we get to talk about stuff privately. So for those interested to take part of that next one we're doing in November, they can always just ping us at CyberHub Engage. So I'm fascinated by you, Chris. I'm fascinated because your brain fascinates me. Your thinking fascinates me. From a cybersecurity perspective, there's so much we can talk about, but we're not getting stuck on cyber. We're talking about quantum. We're going to talk about blockchain. We're going to talk about security around it, the good side and bad side of it, and I'm excited.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoy talking to you and brainstorming, and we can go on for hours and hours.
Yes, we can. We're going to try to be very cognizant of time. It is the Friday before Labor Day weekends, and I mean, and we are in Atlanta. This is like the dead heat of everyone either running from Florida now before Dorian hits. They're all coming up through Atlanta. It's crazy. I guess they opened the Motor Speedway for all the evacuees. Did you know that, Micah?
I haven't been able to check that out.
You've been really busy, Micah.
I have been.
So,
what year is it?
2019, and it's the year of quantum computing.
It is the year
of quantum computing. But Chris, before we get started, just share a little bit with our awesome audience, a bit of your background, just a little bit of how you got into the CDC.
So my first degrees were in microbiology and chemistry, and I worked in labs at University of Iowa and UCLA. Went back and got my electrical engineering degree and then ended up at NSA. And then came to CDC. It was not planned. My first and I came to CDC, and I was thrown into the role that I'm in, which is to do IT research and development. So my first 15 years, I built the infrastructure of CDC. So the operating systems, the backbone, the gateways, nailing up all the internet services, SMTP, even rebuilt the WAN for year 2K, so used ATM technologies. So about 10 years ago, I was left to do what I was originally hired to do. And
sounds like efficiency at its best.
And so it was very fortuitous because I had great experiences building systems, starting from scratch, starting from the ground floor, and building enterprise-wide systems and leading hundreds of people, 300 people at a time, on the standardization of enterprise services at CDC. So gave me a lot of great opportunities and insights and education on the fly. So I'm certified in nothing, but I built everything. And the existing infrastructure system of the Active Directory, I actually put up 20 years ago.
So I will say that you don't have to be certified in anything to be qualified to do something. In fact, in one of the previous episodes that we did around cybersecurity, we were talking about the over-certification of an industry and how it's really complicating workforce development because it's creating standards within HR where they're looking, it's so funny. I saw a CISO role advertised yesterday or the day before on LinkedIn. And the recruiter sent me a message. And my profile on LinkedIn is fairly straightforward. Don't have a college degree. Got into security because I loved security and I wanted to get into it. Didn't need a college degree to get into security because pretty much learned it all on my own. Like I learned financial when I built my fintech company. I built it all by myself. There was no college in the world that was going to help me do what I needed to get done. Because when, we're going to get into blockchain, but when you talk about blockchain in 2013, not many people knew what it was. In fact, Bitcoin was still, I think, under $20.
Pretty unknown.
Pretty unknown at the time. And
so the proof's in the pudding whether you can do something, not whether you're educated in something. So
it's whether or not you can get it done. You've got it done, sir. And you're about to show everyone just that, I think, on this podcast. And it's, I kind of want to dig. We'll jump right into the deep end of the water. And and I think we're going to go to the deep end of the pool, and we're just going to jump in, and we'll hopefully by the end of the podcast we'll make it to the shallow end. But our first conversation. Listen, one thing I have to say, kind of upfront, is I love the CDC. I think it's one of the most effective government agencies that we have. That is really for the good of the people. It's helped cure diseases. It's helped take care of stuff not only here but abroad. The CDC represents the best that America has to give to the world and its citizens. I think it's one of the most underrated agency in government. But you think of a CDC alert when it comes to flu, or the way it teams up with medical professionals and to make sure that we don't have another, what was it? Smallpox or the plague. That we don't have another plague. You guys do amazing work there. So thank you, because you've been there for a very long time, and thank you.
Yeah, so it is a great agency to work for, and it is one of the most trusted agencies in the federal government. So I consider that the primary focus as being an IT professional is to uphold the trust of CDC.
Right.
Because people like myself that built enterprise systems didn't want to be published in the newspaper as the fault for things being breached. So, yes, I put up many systems CDC-wide where I had to secure them. There was no CISO. I was the CISO. I was the enterprise architect. I was the programmer, and migrated system after system. In 2004, I wrote the white paper on how to write secure code at CDC. When I put up Active Directory, I am the person who wrote the password policy. So I've done a lot of security work over the years, and so that's extremely important. And of course, we go through annual security audits to help raise the security of CDC.
I think there's a when you think of security today, the conversations that aren't being had, everyone's so focused. I mean, you and I spoke of cloud security, and part of our meetup at DataBank, we spoke a little bit about cloud, and it was kind of an opportune time, right? Because Capital One breach just happened, and there's a lot of kind of attention now. It takes a breach to get people to pay attention to stuff. It takes something bad to happen in our country for people to pay attention to it, and I think that's that way globally. I don't think we're the only country that goes through that. But there is a technology arms race going on right now that a lot of people today aren't really paying attention to, but we have to start kind of planning for it. And part of it is blockchain, but I think the bigger kind of, you brought up a bunch of very, very interesting statistics around quantum computing. And I think at Black Hat, someone said that a quantum computer could break our best encryption in under 2 or 3 minutes. And you and I had a whole conversation around that. And what does that mean for encryption, right? And some people say, well, encryption's going to die with quantum. And then you brought up a very good counter argument. And I kind of want you to bring up that counter argument now, if you don't mind.
Remind me what I said.
So let's have this conversation on quantum, right?
Okay.
Because you kind of brought up this whole thing around, we're getting outspent $20 to 1 on quantum research.
Well,
right
that's
now.
what we know. That's what's published.
Wow. Who's outspending us?
China, as far as we know. So there's only what we know is published. I think the thing for your audience to understand about quantum and quantum cryptography is that quantum is going to raise the security of everything to make things more secure, because quantum computing can be advantageous to solving problems faster, and it's also faster at breaking encryption, standard encryption. The algorithm for that was written in 1994, 5 years before there was even a quantum computer available. So you can write the algorithms now. So the question is, how many algorithms are already written?
For quantum encryption.
For anything quantum.
and are just sitting there on the shelf just waiting for.
And that's what I've actually asked to do with quantum computing, is to raise the awareness, education, and culture of CDC to begin starting to address quantum algorithms for CDC science.
So you brought up what I think is a really interesting point around quantum, which is, the internet was government first, then became public. But it seems like quantum is the complete opposite. There's a lot of businesses kind of fighting to rule quantum, while governments are backing some of those businesses, and some of it is pure government in some countries that we know where government really, there is no private enterprise, there's government enterprise.
So in the United States, the initiative that was signed by the president last year, December 21st, 2018, sets the agenda for the United States government and industry and academia. So the quantum initiative is very comprehensive and included funding to get everybody started. So it addresses the government and its national labs, a coordination center for quantum activities, the National Science Foundation and NIST, and quantum information science.
Okay.
So there are centers under NIST and centers under the National Science Foundation to advance and to pipeline from the colleges for undergraduates, graduates, postdocs, for industry, for collaboration between academia, industry, and the government on quantum. So it's very comprehensive. It's HR 6227. Anybody can read it. It's on the internet. And so anybody can become involved at this point in time. And I would say there are probably no bad ideas, because we're just beginning to understand the reality of quantum.
But how far back are we from our adversaries that are trying to rule this technology?
We don't know. I would personally say, my personal opinion is we don't know, because on a daily basis you can see news items coming out of labs on work, especially the material science of quantum, I think is amazing. And I don't know who's coordinating all the activities worldwide about what research and development's being done in labs around the world.
So we hear this about cyber, which is, it's kind of like a global effort to try and secure the world. And there's been discussions around a global Geneva Convention around cyber. Do you feel like quantum is going to require something similar? Or is quantum going to be no different than the internet or no different than a normal PC? We're now excited about it, but 10 years from now, it'll be standard and there won't really be superiority.
I think we've just scratched the surface on quantum. We've just opened the door on quantum. So we've just, in the recent 5 years, I would say, have come to understanding that quantum entanglement specifically is real. So quantum entanglement was a hard idea for even quantum physicists to accept. And so now we see the reality of quantum entanglement, and which is the basis for quantum communication as well. So these things are real now, and we have to accept the reality of the quantum world. And so quantum physics and quantum mechanics also has to be readdressed. Okay, so everything, quantum information science, quantum mechanics, quantum physics, to really understand what's going on at the subatomic layer of quantum.
So you mentioned something about a piece of silicon with quantum. Can you share that with our listeners? The lady that you said you're surprised no one's bought her yet?
Okay, yeah. So, just watching the news items on a daily basis about quantum material science specifically. So,
because that was, sorry to cut
Right.
you off. I want you to share the story, but I think for our audience that hasn't looked into quantum, I don't think they understand that part of the technology for quantum already exists. The material technology behind quantum, meaning our existing manufacturing processes yet, don't really support a large scale production of quantum, correct?
Correct. So the desired goal for quantum computing is to have quantum gates, just like we do in standard transistor technology.
Okay.
So a lady and her team from Australia, about a month ago or so, produced and published their science of how she uses scanning tunneling electron microscope and planted a single phosphorus atom into pure silicon-28, which is non-magnetic. And so that formulated the basis for a phosphorus quantum bit gate.
Wow.
So these things are
That's
coming.
groundbreaking.
That is groundbreaking. So the current technology that we use on, for example, the IBM quantum computer is a superconducting Josephson transistor. So those transistors are operating at 10 millikelvin, 100 times colder than outer space.
Wow.
So, and the problem with the production of qubits today is what's called decoherence. So it's the noisiness of the gates. And so you have short duration of time to actually do the computations. And there's noise, so the issue is error correction and stability of the quantum bits.
So behind quantum computing, there's, like you said, and you kind of started saying, which was the science behind that quantum is going to make things a bit more secure because it's going to be able to kind of quickly solve problems. But it's also, when hackers get their hands on quantum computing, it's also going to make life a little bit easier for them. How do you see that battle kind of shaping up? You know, you're kind of in that battlefield. You're on the forefront of kind of looking at it. But, you know, being that person who's built, you know, kind of a major enterprise for a great organization, you would think that security has to be top of mind when you look at quantum.
Yeah, so I think this will be the actual first application of quantum, which is to protect our organizations with a quantum-proof cryptology.
Wow.
So you can go find that there's been a recent NIST competition in Santa Barbara on algorithms for quantum-proof cryptography. And so there's no standard yet, but we have to head that way. So all IT vendors need to think about what their roadmaps are and strategies for quantum-proof systems. So I say that before we have applications in place, before we can take internal applications for science or business, we need to secure our borders first.
So you're coming from I think, a very responsible approach. I personally think industry could care a damn thing about security. I think we see that every single day with the different breaches you hear about. There's not a day that goes by where, you know, you don't see a data breach somewhere happening at some place because of something. And in quantum, my personal opinion, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I just feel like my personal opinion is industry is going to dominate. And while I wish your words and I pray that your words become the pathway of quantum, I feel like it's going to have either a military component first or a business component first, a superiority component first, before it hits security.
You'll notice you can read right in the National Quantum Initiative that the highest priority is leadership for two items of the U.S., economic and security.
Right.
Those are the two main theses of the quantum initiative.
So it's funny, 3 years ago, the big discussion around, I don't know if you remember the last G20, right? I think it was President Obama's last year in office when he met with Putin and President Xi, and I think it was the G20, if I'm not mistaken. It was before they pushed Russia out of the G20. It was right before Crimea happened. I can't remember when it was, but Putin and Obama and Xi kind of, the whole statement was, the country that's going to rule the world is going to be the country that masters AI. And I remember reading that at the time, and I started laughing. And I go, no, it's not. Because I don't care the amount of artificial intelligence you get. The moment you've got computing power defeats intelligence. It does. I mean, is that the right assumption? Is quantum really kind of the be all?
I think it comes down to some fundamental principles in life that apply to everything, which is the game has changed. We're on a different ball field now. So, you see through the history of computing how the game changes and how encryption changed, how we went from, in cryptology, we went from art to science, right? We saw the transition through World War II when we went from the art of encryption that dated back thousands of years to the science, the mathematical science of encryption. So the game changed. That was the pivot point. So now in computing, we're going into a new game. And not everything, only a small niche of problems can be addressed by quantum. So you'll always have your digital computers, and digital computers will outpace quantum for standard
work,
mathematical problems. So think of it as an accelerator, as you would use a NVIDIA card or a FPGA or large memory or more CPUs.
Jeez. So, I mean, like I said, I think the idea that I remember watching that statement and going, no, I don't see AI being what will help people.
No, that's just another tool.
Right. AI is an app.
This is a paradigm shift.
Right. You're right. This is a, it's funny, but I remember when, do you remember when you obviously remember this, when we went from CDMA to 3G?
Yes.
Just from when it took you a minute to get a web page or the first time we sent a picture over from one phone to the other. Do you remember that? I remember it.
I remember 1200 baud modems, okay?
I mean, quantum is it's funny, you see this in security all the time. People talk AI and machine learning and how those are supposed to be the be all end all of security, and I'm very skeptical of it. I think anytime I see someone, say an AI or machine learning, my BS meter goes whoop, 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 whoop.
Reality check. Yeah.
Yeah, because the thing about it is you might be able to develop some sort of artificial intelligence, but that artificial intelligence is only as good as the person who developed it.
True. And if you want to go into that, I can speak about that.
Please.
And my experience. I was in the very first neural computing pilot course at NSA. And I wrote my own 8,000 node Hopfield net to decipher a signal, we'll say. And so I was able to do that deterministically because I knew what the outputs had to be. I know which codes had to come out of the neural net. So it was a deterministic neural net. Most of the neural net type AI technologies today, people oftentimes don't know what has to come out of the neural net decision. So, and being plug and play, oftentimes people never even look at what the actual neural network looks like. So my neural net was hand-coded and hand-programmed from the ground up. So there was no ifs, ands, or buts about what was going on the neural net.
But in today's security world in general, when you hear of AI, it's not real AI, is it?
So
is there such a thing today as real AI that can really change the paradigm in terms of taking away and artificially being better than human intelligence?
Well, I think you're hitting on some important words. So is it intelligent, or is it just a pattern recognition machine?
It's a great... no one said it that simple before. No one said it that simple before.
Okay, so when I had to give my presentation on my neural net at NSA, I had to get the point across in 30 seconds. And so I made them realize that there were flaws in this ability to do pattern recognition. And the easy analogy is to look up at the sky at night and see a patterns of stars that don't actually exist. So you see a pattern, and there are stars there, but there isn't actually a pattern of stars. It's just what your eye wants to see. The brain, the human brain, wants to see a pattern. And so you strive to find the pattern. And so we have to be guarded in our abilities to use these AI-type technologies not to see what we want to see.
So you bring up something that I brought up once when I was I think in middle school. We went to what's it called? A place where you go look at the stars. Help me out here, man.
Observatory.
Observatory. And everyone's looking at the stars, and I see the Big Dipper, and I go, I don't see any of that. I see shiny objects in the sky that are there. Some are aligned, and some aren't.
Right, but if someone pointed out the pattern and you saw the pattern, then your neural net in your brain will lock in on it, and you'll never not see it again.
Okay, let me put it to you like this: I've had people take me to go look at stars, and when I was in the service, you learn to navigate in some parts of the world by looking at stars, right? But till today, you have me look at the stars and say, I mean, give me lines to draw out. You can make any image out of points on anything. It's like looking at the clouds. That cloud looks like a dinosaur. For someone else, it could look like a snake. For someone else, it could be a dragon. For someone else, it could be a cat.
Correct. But if you actually know what the pattern's supposed to be, then you can form a deterministic neural net that will accurately identify the signal of interest.
Is there such a thing, though, in AI today, from your experience, where you've seen something where the pattern that was built into the AI, to the artificial intelligence, was actually a good pattern that really executed the level that you would expect a product like AI or a service or an app or a use case of technology to be really that intelligent?
It's getting better. So compared to 30 years ago, our ability to recognize patterns getting more and more accurate, especially with voice and voice recognition. So visually as a human being, so the best example of pattern recognition is your visual brain, which 24 times a second is recognizing everything in this room. So it's doing pattern matching initially against edges of objects and then formulating what and constructing what these objects are, right? So that's what we're trying to do, or the industry's trying to do, is emulate what happens naturally.
Well, I think
But you realize there are optical illusions.
Correct.
So, right, we're fooled by optical illusions as human beings. So the same thing could be true of computer AI.
Because I feel like computer AI, it's no different than an algorithm, right? An algorithm is only as good as the guy who wrote it and coded it and built it. And if it's not a good algorithm, then it's not a good algorithm. I don't know if you've watched the news. There's a company that is suing Black Hat. And we won't get too much into it, but they developed, they had a presentation at Black Hat about a new form of cryptography that was based off of, instead of just traditional math, it was based off of music and Fibonacci. And they were booed, and people in the middle of the presentation were very agitated at what they were trying to present. And I don't know if that's because of the people and the researchers behind it. It's a company out of New York called Crown. We reported on it this week on the Daily Cyber Briefing. But it was very interesting because I was looking at that and I go, so they're saying that there's another way to do cryptography beyond math, and that it included music, computing, and Fibonacci techniques. So
I haven't read about that, but it's just natural for a human being to have to break through the barriers of awareness, education, and culture, the things
Right.
that you're... So going back to pattern recognition, human beings want to find the pattern that feels familiar. So, it can become a broken record, right? So to change, you have to get out of your culture. There can be no boxes, right?
Right.
You actually have to be able, in today's age, you have to accept any idea that sounds foreign because it might actually work.
So that's really, that kind of brings us to the next piece of kind of our conversation, which is the foreign aspect of blockchain. So blockchain buzzword, was popular. So to me, blockchain kind of took this really, really interesting journey, because when you say blockchain, for most people, the first words that comes to their head is Bitcoin. Blockchain isn't Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a product of blockchain, but blockchain is so much more. And the original blockchain, the idea of blockchain was it's decentralized, no one can control it, everyone's got a say in it. And I think very quickly hackers proved, and I think some of the corrupt minds out there proved very quickly that you can manipulate blockchain. Then blockchain lost some of its appeal. But now blockchain is kind of roaring its head because it does have some real functionality to it. I think IBM's leading a blockchain movement. There's a few stuff that's happening around blockchain. CDC being in healthcare, one of the most, beyond financial, the second best use case for blockchain is in healthcare, is in disease control, is if person A leaves this part of the world and comes to this part of the world, and we know that it stopped in all of these parts, then I can actually quarantine something before it really becomes an epidemic. How do you see blockchain playing?
So I have been notated in the press, the government computing news, that the way that I saw blockchain was as the supply chain management of data. So whether it's healthcare or surveillance systems for CDC, or food traceability by IBM and Walmart and FDA, or the management of insurance policies, car loans, bank notes, whatever it is, really all you're doing is the supply chain management of data, because ultimately you can't actually blockchain a product, right?
Right.
So it's the data about the product that has to be blockchained. So, and it's a wonderful collaborative technology. So having everybody collaborate against a single ledger instead of their own individual ledgers is a fantastic innovation, because you can do so much with it. So I say that it is the engine of truth and trust, and that we can use it at CDC to augment the trust of CDC. So originally, when blockchain started coming out in publications 3 years ago, the intention that people saw was to disintermediate trusted authorities.
Right. It was like, we're going to cut off the banks.
Right. So the CDC's brand value is trust. So, and our commodity is data and information and policy, health policy. So we can improve every aspect of CDC through blockchain technologies, whether they're internal or whether we can utilize commercial industrial blockchains where the data is already available deterministically.
So that's a very, very good point, because blockchain in its kind of, there's I love reading sometimes like the someone who's narrating the history of blockchain. They make it sound so the intentions of the inventors of blockchain was, and you're like, you don't know their intentions. No one knows their intentions, because they don't have stated intentions on the record anywhere. People are assuming intention of really blockchain, but to me, blockchain is kind of the gateway of I don't want to say tracking, but of being able to monitor every aspect of a sort of evolution of a product or a disease or a financial transaction.
Yes,
because
it can be used as a tracking. So in blockchain language, we call that provenance, right? So you can track the genesis of a product from the ground, diamonds, raw materials, anything from its inception all the way to being sold and obtained and even passed on, right? So supply chain management from cradle to grave of anything.
So a few years ago, we're going to go back to quantum for a second, but we're going to talk quantum blockchain. There was a paper that came out from a big university. I don't remember who it was, and they said blockchain's dead because quantum's going to come in and it's going to completely destroy blockchain, and blockchain's just going to be an outdated technology. So you've done both. You've looked at blockchain. You look at quantum. Here's someone who's very, very educated, knowledgeable about it. How do you take that paper? And I don't know who that paper is by, and Micah doesn't have his computer here to Google it. So
true and not true, right? So there's all forms of blockchains, all the way from Bitcoin, which is public and anonymous, to private permission blockchains that aren't exposed to the internet.
Correct.
So if we know that anything that's decoupled from the outside of an organization so that you can't get inside to an internal system, it doesn't necessarily have to be quantum proof, right? So that would come down to inside knowledge and inside attack if it was done inside an organization. But there'll be many organizations that have internal blockchain systems that won't be vulnerable to quantum. Be lots of outside blockchain networks like Bitcoin that will be vulnerable to quantum. And so quantum's great at figuring out the factorization of numbers. That algorithm was written in 1994 by Peter Shor. So long before, we mentioned this before on this podcast, that algorithm was written 5 years before a quantum computer actually came into being, a 2-bit one. So you would need at least 512 true quantum bits of computing power to break Satoshi Nakamoto's master Bitcoin key. So we're a ways away.
But if you break that key, wow. I can't wait for the first lab that does actually do that, because that's one of those. But you know, when
so yes, we do want. There are strategies, and they're published. They're out on the internet, and there are strategies by the federal government and industry and academia to get to quantum-proof encryption for public use, so to replace our current systems. That's in the works, and we will need to do that.
So I've been a kind of an advocate of encrypting the blockchain, and what I mean is there's a way to actually. So I was at a university in Germany, and I forgot where, just outside of Dusseldorf, and I forgot the name of the university, and I apologize. It is Friday afternoon, so for those listening, it's 5:00 Friday. So it's 5:00 somewhere. Well, it's 5:00 here on a Friday, and it's Labor Day weekend. So I apologize. I don't have that name in front of me. I don't have my notes in front of me, but it was on my notes. So there was a university where one of the discussions was, could we use blockchain in creating a unlimited encryption key that continually changes but continually identifies its master insert. So very, very kind of advanced way of thinking of encryption, but you know, we know that the lowest level of encryption has already been broken. It's ineffective. I mean, even though there's still people who sell it, I mean, you don't really buy it. You know, the next level of encryption, they say hasn't been broken. Obviously, there's theories behind it that suggest otherwise, although that's unpublished at the moment, correct?
I wouldn't know.
No, you wouldn't know. That's a video moment. But the theory behind this specific university in Germany at the time was, if we can use blockchain that continually is encrypted itself as a chain, but then it's continually updating its encryption. So while you can have someone working on one way trying to break the encryption, it's constantly kind of changing. It's kind of an unlimited, an endless cycle of encryption on the blockchain that keeps it secure. Is it,
Well, in any form of game theory may work, but when we look at what's actually so the best testament of blockchain security is Bitcoin, actually. So under current cryptographic methods, we can say that it's surviving, and it's a great proof of case study, right?
Right.
So the question is, where have the hacks happened? It happens at the low points, right? At
Correct.
the user interfaces or inside the systems, insider knowledge, or stealing keys, right?
Some of it is bad key management.
Right.
A lot of it is bad key management.
Right. So you can raise the barriers quite high with any potential methodology, but typically it's going to be something simple that breaks through, some social engineering hack, right? So
so you bring up a very good point, which is kind of the human aspect of hacking, right? Which is, I'm sure you've seen this kind of comic, an image, and it's a huge boxing ring, and on one side they have all this great cyber technology, and on the other hand they have Sloppy Bob. And Sloppy Bob is, a guy that clicks on anything, and it doesn't matter what technology you put in. Bob makes sure that that technology is essentially rendered ineffective in helping really defend your organization. And I feel like that comic very much symbolizes the challenges we go through in technology and in general in security, which is you're only as good as your next greatest person handling it. You've done that, in one of our conversations, you talked about how, when you're thinking of building infrastructure, you're thinking of how humans actually interact with it as you're building these layers of security based on interaction necessarily, and not always technology.
So you have to, every good enterprise architect and technologist has to think like an ethical hacker, right? Because that's how we protect our systems. So we can say that quantum is going to raise the level of public security. So it's going, how well you implement your technologies inside your organization will be up to you thinking about how could you potentially hack this system. Always. I mean, that's always going to be the case.
So there's a lot of kind of discussion around quantum and not only its security, but you're the first to come and talk about that quantum in its nature, it's going to enhance security. I feel like I haven't seen that talking point in a lot of other places. I've seen people really talk about quantum in the aspects of it's going to change the paradigm. It's going to change the way we interact with data and how data moves and how we process it and how quick we process it and how fast it's done and how sophisticated it can be. From a security perspective, though, and I think, for a CISO, one of the biggest challenges is business evolves so much faster than security. And I'm going to kind of pull up one of my notes here because you brought up a really good point of this, which is when you look at your roadmap for quantum, in your opinion, what's the roadmap for quantum over the next? When do you see, some people have said 2019 and 2020 are the years of quantum because 2015, 14, 15 were AI.
Yeah, so I think if we look through the historical progress of IT security and quantum or computing capabilities, right? So we went through what was probably a linear pace up until the internet generation. So then we all would say everything's going exponential. And I would say now under the fourth industrial revolution, we're going geometric. So the technologies are coming at us so fast and the innovations are being so fast. It's hard for us all to actually understand them and consume them and know what to do with them, right? And so that's putting more strain on people like us to figure out what to pay attention to and what's the value of that technology to your organization. So that's one of the things that I try and do, is assess the value of a technology for CDC. And so for blockchain, I would say it is the augmentation of trust of CDC, or upholding the trust. And there are actually metrics out that you can find on how much effort it takes employees to uphold the trust of an organization. So you can place a value on blockchain for your organization that way. You have to think differently. We're not talking about standard MBA metrics of total cost of ownership or return on investment. We're talking about what value does this technology bring to your organization and how. So with quantum, it's not an option. We don't have an option about going to quantum or not. We will end up with quantum cryptographic algorithms to protect our organizations from someone with a quantum machine to try and drill through our organizations. That's just not optional. And as you see, any organization that lags behind in security will be hacked. So whether it's their implementation of security or their lack of security practices.
Well, we're seeing security vendors getting hacked at this point, and MSSPs being breached right now. And there's a trend of, hackers are now going to the crown jewel and they're saying, I don't need to hack all these companies. I'll just hack the security company and I'll get to everyone else that way. Because if I hack them, then I've got the keys to the kingdom, right?
Right.
I mean, that's part of it. When you look at quantum from a security perspective, I feel like I've spoken to a lot of people who are in the autonomous vehicle space. And in the autonomous vehicle space, I feel like one of the biggest challenges that they have at the moment is, how does a car make decisions when bad stuff happens? So some of the discussions around it are, well, we need to revamp our roads. And I don't know if you've heard this talking point with sensors and beacons. And I'm like, that just sounds expensive. It sounds like maintenance is going to be a pain in the tail.
Right. So we never do technologies for the sake of technology, do we?
We do technology for the sake of improving something.
There's got to be a value behind it.
Right. I feel like the value of quantum is going to be in the autonomous vehicle space. I feel like that's where it's going to might have the biggest impact, is autonomous vehicles, because you need to be able to process information so fast. Think about it. When you slam your brakes, when you're driving, a second too fast, a second too late, and you're in the back of someone else's car. A moment, a mill of a second.
That I would question, because right now quantum computing is too slow. Maybe eventually it can handle that type of problem. But when you actually look at the process, the information processing process of visual information, and if you study how the human information processing of visual information, right, and how you make that decision whether to hit the brakes or not, I think is actually much more amenable to a highly parallelized technology like NVIDIA GPUs. Today you can get 5,000 cores on a card, right? To do massive parallel processing of individual elements. So just like your retina, right? You have many independent, an array of information coming to your eye. So that's very amenable to that type of computing.
So you don't feel like quantum in the next decade will revolutionize autonomous vehicles? You don't think the technology is going to be there?
Well, so I think we would have to have probably new interfaces to feed the information to a quantum computer. A quantum computer is probabilistic. this is one of the things. Let me step back here a second. As a computer scientist, you want to figure out how you can use quantum computing without going the rabbit hole of quantum physics, because it can take you down. And it is very seductive. Quantum physics, quantum mechanics, quantum anything is very seductive.
Sexy.
Yes. It's mysterious, dark, interesting. The fact is, it's reality. Every atom in your body is quantum-based. Every atom that has more than one electron is actually entangled. So you yourself are a quantum machine. Everything in nature is a quantum machine. The current technology you use for transistors are quantum-based. They're quantum-based materials. They're just not quantum computers.
So when you say it's probabilistic, right? Does that mean that as quantum computers kind of, and a quantum technology, let's say, let's call it a tech, because that's what it is. It's a tech. It's not a. They say quantum computers, but they're not really computers. It's a computer, but it's technology. It's a, like you said earlier, it's a paradigm shift in technology. It's going from one way of doing things to another way. Some people look at it like the difference between 4G and 5G.
So I would say no. So I do have expertise in analog and digital signal processing, and I would say no. This is entirely different world. Okay, when we say program a quantum computer, we're not talking about traditional programming. Okay, we're talking about a different way of thinking. So this kind of could be a segue into discussing what makes a qubit and what are the properties of a quantum bit and what are the things we're going to use to actually conduct quantum computing. How does that happen? So this conversation starting to embark into that.
And that's fine.
Okay.
We'll go with it. Because it's interesting. I mean, I'm sitting here in my mind's like trying to grasp all of this.
So it is very hard to wrap our minds around quantum computing. Coming from not being a quantum physicist, we have to figure out how much quantum physics we have to understand in order to do quantum computing. Okay, because you don't actually want to take on being a quantum physicist in order to program a quantum computer.
No, you don't.
No, you don't.
No, you don't. That's not a. You don't go down that route to end up coming back to the main road. If you're going down the untraveled road, you're staying
Yes.
on the road less traveled.
So what I've been working on within CDC is trying to figure out that pathway. How much do I have to teach people about quantum physics to understand that they're going to be manipulating the phase relationship of a three-dimensional quantum bit in order to do quantum computations? Because that's what you're doing. Digital on the outside, digital on the input, digital on the output, analog waves on qubits on the inside. And so the question is, how much do you have to understand in order to manipulate not just three-dimensional phase relationships of a quantum bit, but the superpositioning of quantum bits together, meaning that their phases are altering each other. So you can think of, when you look at the surface of the ocean, there's superpositioning of all the frequencies of waves, and you see a rumpled ocean, right? That's the superposition of many different frequencies all at once. That's superpositioning. Or when you hear sounds together, you're hearing many different frequencies at once that are in superposition. Entanglement is an entirely different beast that we have, as human beings, have a hard time coming up with analogies for, because it is so strange.
So why is China outspending us 20-1 on quantum? What's China's long game in quantum technology and quantum computing in whole? I mean, is it really whoever rules quantum rules the world?
I would say, and it is published, so I'm just reiterating what's
That's fine.
published. So this is the moonshot of the past century. This is the race of the century.
Okay.
Quantum computing is the current race. And so the Chinese have published, it's been on the internet. You can watch a NOVA program for an hour about what China's accomplished with quantum communications, ground to satellite, for instance. So not only were they proving...
Is that their own IP, or are they just stealing IPs from other places and no one's really talking about it?
Well, nature owns the intellectual property on quantum entanglement. You can't patent it.
No, I understand. No,
So
I
the
understand
question is-
that.
so
but the
what's-
Chinese aren't exactly known for their ability to work around the clock. They'd much rather have someone else do the work and then go hack it, steal it, and produce it.
Right. I think that there is great value here to be obtained by being the leader in quantum computing, quantum information science, quantum communications, quantum teleportation. Every field quantum, there's great advantages to being the leader. So
China's outspending us 20-1.
So the
Published.
the essential idea, which is hard for people to understand and articulate, is this idea of quantum entanglement, which is that if I'm a qubit and you're a qubit and we're entangled, then as soon as an observation of me is made, we know instantaneously what you are. So faster than the speed of light, communications, because the information, there's a correlation between us. And so as soon as I'm known, we already know what informations you are.
At a fraction of a second.
No second.
No second.
So
time wouldn't be able to measure that.
So
knowledge.
here's where we start going down the rabbit hole, okay?
Okay, so we don't want to go that.
Well, I'm just going to give you a taste of it.
That's fine.
So Einstein, it's called the EPR paper. Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen wrote the paper in order to essentially disprove entanglement as being something real. But Niels Bohr said, no, I think you're wrong. I think there is actually something here. Okay? So what's been proven since the time of the Irish physicist, Bell is his last name, that it's the Bell test to prove that entanglement existed. And everybody's reproofed this in many different ways. And it is what the Chinese essentially did, was prove entanglement, and quantum communications can happen over entangled photons. So it's kind of a dual...
Is that a communication superiority form? Being able to use quantum communications from ground to satellite?
Yes, because you can't have a man-in-the-middle attack.
So they eliminate the man-in-the-middle attack. You can't intercept their communication.
No.
So I read the book.
No, you can't intercept it and repeat it because you'll break the entanglement of the photons.
Wow. So it makes something, I don't want to say unhackable, that's premature, but it makes it very difficult to break.
Yes, yes.
So I read the book, and now apparently there was a movie, and I'm probably going to try and watch it this weekend, of the British physicists and scientists that the British Army brought in to try to... They built the first massive computer to break the Nazi code during World War II. I forgot the guy's name. I forgot the guy's name. I just finished the book about a month ago. And I read the book after you and I spoke. Because after you and I spoke for the first time, I went and I started researching kind of the origin of massive computers and cryptography. And because the Nazis were famous for using cryptography in their communication, I mean, it was almost impossible to break. That was part of, the Navajo code talkers in different wars, and kind of what we did during World War II in terms of just communication and trying to break Nazi code. But then the British were extremely successful, and that was part of how they started defeating the Nazis. They were able to they used a computer that was within hours of a message was able to kind of break it apart
Right.
and let
So
you know.
that was the transition point from the art of cryptology to the science using mathematics.
Correct.
Right.
And now you're saying we're now going from mathematics to geometry, essentially. Or did I misunderstand you?
No, we're going from digital to analog.
So we went from analog to digital, and now we're going back to analog.
Well, please think of quantum computing. Okay, so in quantum computing, we're talking about the utilization of waves.
Okay.
Okay, so...
But waves that are entangled.
Okay, so we're going to bounce back and forth between going down the rabbit hole of
that's fine.
Quantum physics and
so
computing.
I want to make sure I understood what you said correctly, because I remember you saying, we went from art to science, science to math, and now we're going from math to...
Well, it's all math. Okay. It's all math.
But math, math, you've got geometry, statistics, and so forth.
Let's just say that truly the mathematics behind quantum bits is very rigorous. Okay. We're talking about some very hard math to do, and we'll just say it's beyond most people. Okay. So the math is very hard. We want to make these quantum computers as easy as possible so that you could actually say, oh, here's the subroutine to do hack this encryption code, right? Eventually down the line, there'll be lots of libraries of quantum algorithms to do things without you having to actually understand quantum computing.
Very similar to what's going on with development today. You've got all these open source codes out there. Everything.
Right. So if you have to, and so I do want to make this one analogy. So for unique first-time quantum algorithms, you will have to understand quantum bits. But as a say off-the-shelf programmer that can use libraries, you won't have to. Now, in the digital world, you've never ever had to understand how a silicon transistor actually works. As an electrical engineer, I went through classes on how you make silicon, how you design logic gates, how you design microcode, right? How you design compilers, all those layers. There's layers and layers and layers. But in quantum computing, to write a unique, novel, raw quantum algorithm, you must understand a quantum bit. But in digital world, you can write a program without ever having to understand a transistor.
Wow.
So the rabbit hole part that physicists still can explain is the double slit experiment.
Okay.
So it's been known for over 100 years that when you shoot a single photon or a single electron through a double slit, what shows up on the opposite side of the wall is not two bands of photons or electrons, but a probability pattern, an interference pattern of where the electrons or photons land. It lands in bands that appear to be in an interference pattern, and no one can explain that, even today.
So you were talking, I kind of want to go back for a second to the quantum communication piece that the Chinese are doing today for satellite communications, right? So you said it kind of eliminates, because what you said is two photons go together, and essentially you can't really break them apart, because when you break them apart, the message is
broken.
Message is broken. There's no
so
way.
It would be like
at the moment, there's no way to recover it.
Right. So like back in the you and I are qubits experiment, right? So if someone sampled me and they tried to intercept in some way the information, the relationship, the correlation between you and I would be broken. So it
would be lost forever.
It's a disentanglement, right?
Right.
So
would be lost forever.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wow. And the Chinese already do that. Scary
Well, we've done it. Lots of people around the world have repeated this.
Okay,
in,
so
in many different ways.
All right, so the Chinese don't have this.
No.
Okay, woo! Dude, you had me worried there for a second. I was like, the Chinese are going to put lasers on satellites, start shooting down at us.
No. This is well published.
Space Force.
I think the uniqueness of what can be done is in the material science of how you make qubits and how you do quantum communications.
So that's that silicon bit from Australia that you
Right.
were
So
talking
versus
about.
just a junction for a supercooled transistor or other ways,
Which is
using
far more
diamonds.
expensive.
There's many. So the last time I gave a presentation at CDC on quantum, the night before I gave it, there were 15 ways to make a qubit in material science, and by the morning there were 17. The next morning there were 17 ways, right? So there's an increasingly number of ways to make qubits and how to do these things, quantum.
Unbelievable. We're in the midst of this. So I was listening to I wasn't listening. Last night I was reading a paper of kind of someone trying to describe the fourth industrial revolution being what we're going through now. And in my head, as I was preparing for our podcast, I go, would quantum be the fifth industrial revolution? With the adoption of quantum, not single part of what's going on right now with communication, but I'm saying when you're able to produce a quantum computer or quantum computing to the point where it's the size of a MacBook or an iPad, and it does way more than any of those devices can do today. And my gut feeling says my grandkids may have that in their hands in 30, 40 years. You know, Jasmine, don't hurry to have kids, please. But if you think of that, you think of our grandkids or our great-grandkids being able to have a quantum that may be an iPad. And I'm not creative enough to think of it, but it may not even be anything. It may be a Minority Report wall that, you're
right.
Stuff like that just becomes very kind of, I don't want to say futuristic, but very beyond current human comprehension, because very few people do understand quantum now. And I also like to say, when you say that, I always kind of one of the talking points on a talk I gave not long ago was not many people understand security now. And the fact is that when you think of encryption, I know security professionals that when I try to talk about encryption can talk to me about the different encryption that's out there, AES 2056 and so forth. But when you ask them, well, what does it really do? How do you manage the keys? It's like, I don't know. He does. Right. And who's he? He's the guy that sold it to me. And I'm like, okay.
Right. And, the social hacking, it's especially for the elderly who you can just call them up and say, hey, I need to fix your machine. What's your user ID and password, right? And then suddenly they're off and running with your credit card, the person's credit card. So it doesn't matter whether they're using a computer that's a quantum computer or not.
A human is going to be a human.
So we have to improve the human interface to security, right? So, I carry around a lot of security technologies, including a Yubico key that's FIPS 140-2 approved, right? I have military grade FIPS 140-2 level 3 USB sticks that you can run over, throw through 10% Clorox and continue to reuse, very hardy technologies. But all I have to do is give someone the key code or accidentally reveal it, and you take a very intelligent technology and dumb it down, right?
So people are trying to overcome that with biometrics. They're saying if all you have to do is look at something, then maybe you don't screw it up, Chris. I read a Black Hat report of someone who beat biometrics by using their 3D printer to print a full version 3D version of someone's head. Then they put it on a sex robot and heated the sex robot to body temperature, which modern $8,000 sex robot today does that. So I say sex robot because the most popular robots apparently on the planet are sex robots.
Okay.
I don't know if you knew that or not.
No, I didn't know that.
And sex robots have artificial machine learning. So if you have, and there's a really funny comedy special on it. Whitney Cummings did a comedy special on Netflix. Everyone should watch it. Really, really good. The last 15 minutes of that special is all about sex robots. It was after I saw that, and she was on Joe Rogan podcast. And so I saw the Joe Rogan podcast with her, saw her Netflix special, and then I started looking into it because, again, it followed our conversation over humans and quantum and robotics and AI and blockchain. And when I was in Japan, one of the most fascinating things I saw was they had, at the time every time I go to Tokyo, I'm always fascinated by what they're able to do with mechanics and engineering and sex, because that's how it all revolves around.
You want a sex robot?
No, I don't want a sex robot. Here's what's fascinating for me, right? So we've been able to devise technology from silicone and material and all kinds of stuff to create a robot for sexual purposes that emulates human interaction for lonely men to have a female companion. But here's where the but is. And men are willing to pay $4,000 to $25,000 for those robots.
So I'm going to add some humor in here from a CDC perspective. Maybe it'll stop STDs.
You would hope so. Unless you share your sex robot, right? Then you don't know. It might give you a virus. But so very interesting is the company that produces the sex robots, you're able to send them, if you, let's say, for example, you love your wife and you want to have a sex robot that looks exactly like your wife. So, Micah, you can have one of Jackie.
That's okay. Let's get to the point.
It's able to, they actually mold your face, and then they create a silicone mold of your face, and then they use 3D printing to essentially objectify your eyes, your nose, your lips, your all of that. Very cool. Watch the Whitney Cummings special. I guarantee you'll be fascinated. You don't have to watch the whole comedy thing. Just skip to the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and I'm telling you'll get a crack out of it, but you realize this industry does exist. This silicone does exist. These materials have been made. And what's fascinating for me is we've made these robots, yet we can't find a way to automate some of the most basic human functions yet. But we've been able to automate sexual pleasure. So it lets you know that when the human mind wants to go somewhere, it can get there. And I feel like the human mind doesn't want to get to this yet because it's just not a priority for our generation. We live in a place where the thought process behind it is, I'd rather do that because that's really cool. And on Instagram, and here's the thing, this robot emulates your voice. It still speaks like a robot almost, but it's able to have a conversation with you. It's very smart. So if you say, hey, Lindsay, how are you? And Lindsay was a robot, would answer and be like, I'm great. How are you? And it goes through and through and through. And so I'm fascinated by it because the whole reason I went looking for it was because of our conversation. We didn't have a conversation. For full disclosure, we did not have a conversation on sex robots. We had a conversation on quantum, security, blockchain, and silicone materials, and all these different materials.
Well, STDs are a very important part of CDC's business. So it's not necessarily a wrong thing to talk about. But I think what you're bringing out is some very important things about human beings and technology, right? So it's clear that human beings need connection. And that's what you're really exemplifying, is the human need for connection. And so there's technological emulation of that.
Connection without rejection.
Unconditional love.
Unconditional.
Yeah.
Program it and it'll do what
right. So I think we have technology as a tool, and we're going to use technology to improve our lives however we can, whether it's a washer and dryer or a car or a smartphone. We're going to use technology to improve our lives. So the things that you're talking about in contrast are very hard things, right? That's why it takes the quantum physicists and the mathematicians to invent the next computing technology, because these are not intended for entertainment purposes, right? So there's an intentional goal scientifically to discover, ironically, nature. What makes us work? What is the essence of being a human being? So we dive down into the rabbit hole of quantum physics and we discover reality's quantum-based. It's not what we see. Whoops, sorry. So I think that we're at a turning point in our understanding of the universe and what it will mean to be a human being. So we'll always use technologies for connection, entertainment, making our lives better. But I think we're at this sort of a deflection point, right? We're going to be turning with quantum information science and quantum technologies, quantum sensors, quantum radar, quantum communications, that we're turning into something that we're going to see as true reality of what this universe is. So right now, I can say that you've been using Newtonian mechanics for your entire life. You've leveraged gravity, but you've never understood it.
Right.
No one can actually define what gravity is yet. We can't really define what entanglement is, but in both cases, gravity and entanglement, we can utilize both of them. Our macroscopic physics Newtonian world of gravity is easy to deal with. Okay, it's easy. You're using it right now standing on the Earth. But to delve into the quantum world is very hard.
So let me ask you this. Can quantum eventually strengthen human nature? So we were talking about eventually you'll have sloppy Bob that'll click on something from security purpose. So based on what you're telling me, if we're quantum made, right?
You are.
I'm quantum.
There's no if, ands, or buts.
No if, ands, or buts. I'm quantum, you're quantum, he's quantum. So if I'm able to bring a quantum being that's artificial, can it be that quantum piece fixes the bad things in a human? I.e., don't click that link in a cyber perspective, or better yet, don't grab that gun and go do a mass shooting at that place, because that's just an evil part of you. That's an evil part of your, or a misunderstood part of your quantum being. And now this computerized quantum being is going to come and it's going to level and fight that quantum being to quash it from a human perspective. Now I'm taking everything outside of computing, right? And I'm saying, could quantum computing, being that we're quantum beings, right? And being that eventually it's entanglement. So if I'm a bad entangled person, so to my mind, I don't know if you've ever seen this movie Dread with Sylvester Stallone, where he gets frozen and then he comes back to the future and he's all entangled. He's kind of, everyone has been entangled of this peaceful beings. Then these two guys that were flash frozen and now they're defrosted, and one of them's evil. Wesley Snipes is evil. And hasn't he just picked up the evil role and just rolled with it his entire life? Tax evasion, jail,
it's valuable.
You name it, right? Like, but that's based on what you're telling me. In my head, I'm thinking the real paradigm shift there is, can we create a computer entanglement that really goes into a human entanglement and balances out the good and the bad to create a level human being?
Yeah, so that's a huge
undertaking,
ethical question.
but I'm saying
so let's slice and dice this into multi perspectives here, and let's take the perspective: just, is it technologically possible?
Is it? I'm asking you. You're the quantum guy.
So I would say anything that we can imagine is actually possible because nature created our brains.
Correct.
And there's probably no unnatural thoughts, right? How can you not have a natural thought? It's coming out of your brain, nature created.
Right, but
right?
ideas are similar.
But let's look at the brain. So at 20 watts, it's about 17 billion times more powerful than the 15 megawatt supercomputer in the world. Okay, 20 watts. Nature did a really good job. So I think we're a long ways away from, you might be able to construct, synthesize DNA, cells, cellular materials, all that thing. But how do you recreate what nature created in a brain? Okay, that is extremely challenging, right?
Correct.
I mean, we've just scratched the surface of quantum. We've just scratched the surface of neural computing and AI. We have a long ways to go. So it's not that you can't synthetically create atoms and molecules and structures, right? You might be able to synthesize predetermined protein molecules, enzymes that work in the cell, okay? Those things are coming, actually. So there's lots of technologies you see in the press, like CRISPR and so on. Those technologies about being able to construct and alter human biology are in the works, and they'll continue to evolve. The question is, how do you create intelligence that the human being has? And so
AI. Come on. We just talked about it.
Yeah. So no.
AI and quantum computing. I can't wait for it to see the vendor that does that one. We've developed an AI quantum computing supercomputer security device, and when a hacker wants to do something bad, it electrocutely shocks them through their, magnetic keyboard, and it sends them up to hell. I'll buy 100 of those.
I'm not sure which millennial person that will be in which millennia, right?
Well, I love this episode specifically because we've talked about security and we've scratched the surface of it. We've really gone into kind of like this new innovative technology, which I feel like no one's really talking about because it's not here yet, but it's around the corner. I mean, no one knew of 4G until 4G came, right? Like, no one knew of computers until there was a computer. No one knew of the internet, and then it changed everything. Right. And it was quick.
Steve Jobs said it, customers don't know what they need until you show it to them, right?
Well, think of, you know what? You brought up a really good point, but think of iPhone. The first iPhone was bulky, glitchy, slow. And Steve Jobs didn't wait 2 years to come up with something new. It was like 4 months later that they brought out the 3G. I mean, people forget that. People forget that the first iPhone, the 2G iPhone, I have it upstairs.
Right. So I think this is the transition from not knowing what you don't know to it becoming universal common knowledge.
Correct.
Right. So we are on that
we're
inflection point on quantum where we are now going to begin accepting. I mean, it's really hard to accept quantum entanglement. It really is hard to accept it.
I think the way you described it, but the way you describe, like, so in my head as a thinker, and I like to consider myself a thinker. I write a lot of different ideas, and like, listeners on the show, one of the papers I'm writing and one of the things I'm hoping to present at RSA this year is I'm taking cyber incidents, comparing it with aviation history and aviation incidents, and going, if we could make aviation the safest mode of transport in the world, couldn't we do the same with security by just adapting the same exact practices that we did to secure aviation to cybersecurity? And not just from a technology perspective, but from a human perspective.
Right.
It used to be that you could smoke on an airplane and you didn't really have and you didn't really have to wear a seatbelt, and you wore a suit to get on a plane. You would never fly in a suit today, not unless you were flying and the place you were landing at, you had to go to a meeting immediately.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you'd wear jeans and a t-shirt. When I saw a guy on a suit today on the flight, and I looked at him and I go, "Hey, weirdo. Who wears a suit on an airplane today? Aren't you worried your jacket's going to get all..."
Right.
You know?
That's a culture, right? That's
Right.
become cultural norm.
But the cultural norm around security is, and the main culprit behind cybersecurity events is humans. And so when you brought up entanglement for quantum for me, in my head, I went, that's the missing aspect of security. That's the one thing that technology nowadays will never be able to do, which is fix a human's behavior when it does something bad.
Right. So even in designing enterprise systems, we want to put technologies in place to protect the users from themselves. Right.
But you can only do so much.
Right. You can. So it's the sort of the Pareto rule where you try and find that curve where you start getting diminishing returns, right? That's your cutoff, the roll-off point, right? So you do as much as you can for the best value.
So I described that. I was sitting with a bunch of non-technical folks on Wednesday evening for dinner, and they were saying, how do you describe cyber? Like, what should we look at? How should we look at cyber? And I said, you should look at cyber like you look at lasagna. I go, most people will do the basic, they'll have the antivirus, they'll use a VPN, they'll have a firewall.
All the layers.
All the layers, but it's a really soft layers. They're all soft layers. So when you take your spoon through the lasagna or your fork through the lasagna, it cuts right through it. Go, in cyber, I want to make a lasagna you could never cut through. Or you can cut through the first two layers because they're soft, but then the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, however many layers you've got in your lasagna are hard as hell because I burned it. I've stuck it in the oven for too long. It's unedible. So the first two layers are edible, but then every other layer is burnt. You can't get through it. You can't cut it with your knife, no matter what knife you bring.
Right. So
kind of defense in depth. I compared defense in depth to lasagna.
Right.
We should change the name of our podcast. The cyber lasagna. It's like a picture of like a lasagna.
Well, so it's from a systems engineering perspective, I look at things as filters.
Right.
So everything is a system that filters for something. So the harder the security, what are you filtering for? Harder, smarter.
So defense, so defense in depth today is designed to say, so a hacker is able to beat our firewall, fine, but then he's got to go through this maze and through that maze. I kind of feel like cybersecurity today has taken a note out of a Tarantino action movie, right? Where like in Kill Bill, she has to fight like 100 Japanese and cut off their arms and legs before she has to fight like the leader of it all. So defense in depth is no different. We're putting 100 soldiers that we're willing to sacrifice, and then if you're able to defeat our master of all, then you've reached our golden, you've reached the master ticket. You've reached the vault.
Well, so that's a war story, and so in the art of war, the person with the most resources wins the war.
Correct.
So you have the better tools, the better weapons, the better strategy, the better information. So the person with information wins the war.
How often do you read The Art of War?
I've read it many times.
I read it once a year. I'm actually reading it right now. I read it on the flight today.
We could go into The Art of War offline. For days, right?
Days.
So it is a war, right? It's a security war.
Correct.
So when the barriers get so high and so hard, then people look for the easy routes, right? The things that's like...
But that's the human factor, right? I mean, to be a hacker before social engineering, before permissions before, when you put everything in like a server room and you were the only guy that had access to it, and if someone wanted to have access to it, they had to come with their laptop and plug in, right? When cyber and physical security were one of the same, right? Because your data didn't sit on a cloud, it sat on a computer and on servers. And nowadays there's no, when people, the whole cloud is someone else's computer is really funny, but it's so true. We talked about that at the kind of the
data bank,
the data bank meetup, kind of roundtable, whatever we want to call it, the think tank of it. But you look at that and you go, okay, now data sits everywhere, right? Data's everywhere.
This model hasn't changed since Ross Perot.
Wow. Didn't he just die? He just died, right? He died.
Yes, he did.
Year.
So he was a military graduate and worked for IBM and saw the inefficiencies and went and started EDS and had a time-sharing option for many people to use the mainframe long before IBM put time-sharing option on a mainframe. So, I say that Ross Perot invented the cloud, because it's the same model. The compute model hasn't changed. It's a thin client interface into a computer that you don't own. Quantum computing right now exists the same way, that you won't have a quantum computer for a long, long time in your hands. It's just easier for you not to have to even manage one, right?
Databank's going to have it.
You'll just use it from your smartphone device, whatever that is, or your AI, your VR, or your laptop. It'll just be the thin client interface into another machine. So the compute model's never changed.
That's telling you, I'm just in my head, and you and I will probably run through this offline for so long, but quantum could have a kind of, and whether ethical or not, and I'm not advocating here for mind control or human behavior control, although it sounds like it, and I realize that's what I sound like at the moment.
Mind control and sex robots. You're advocating.
No, I'm advocating that I'm actually very agitated that we wasted human capital in inventing stuff like sex robots instead of having maybe a robot that supports the handicapped or the elderly, or really does improve lives of the most needy folks, instead of creating a product that some pervert who obviously has serious issues decides to buy to have relations with. Just saying. I find that disturbing. Because I feel like that's a waste of human capital.
So, ideas like the concept of CDC is altruism. It's altruistic leadership, because you're doing what's in the best interest of the nation, right?
Of the nation, of the population, right?
So we have this beautiful mission vision statement of the better prevention of illness, disability, and death, which covers just about everything. Right.
Well,
so it's a very altruistic mission. Now, so that has you have executives who make these decisions that this is what we should do. That's great. That's the fifth level of leadership. Altruistic leadership is the fifth level of leadership. Okay, so those things have to come from leaders who know how to lead large concepts.
Right. And I think if I reverse back, is in my head when I think of quantum, and I think you've described it best as an entanglement, that once you unentangle it, if you're able to unentangle it, then it's nothing. It's void and null. You've got nothing out of it. So then it becomes, how do you get into that entanglement and become part of it so that you can at least try to access part of that entanglement? Because that's what I'm thinking from a bad guy perspective, right? From an ethical.
So let's talk just for a second about what actually happens between the ingress and the egress of the digital side of a quantum computer.
And so then the analog waves.
In between, it's qubits, right, that are interacting. And so how do you know what the state of a qubit is? You have to observe it. So as soon as you make the observation, you've destroyed the state of the qubits. So by the same token about quantum communications, the same thing applies inside the quantum computer. As soon as you make the observation, so that the easy way that people have used this analogy, it's the human analogy of what superpositioning is. So everybody hears it, you know, it's 0 and 1 at the same time. You take a coin, it's heads or tails, and you spin it. When it's in its spinning state, it's in superposition. And you don't know whether it's heads or tails until you stop it. Okay? As soon as you stop it, you just lost the entanglement or superpositioning with other qubits.
So you got to be able to stick to it. You can't
What I'm
stop
saying
it.
is there's no way to get inside and make a sampling of it in the middle. Okay? Between, it's digital going in and digital coming out, but it's digital coming out by the virtue of sampling it. As soon as you ask, what is it, you're done.
Done.
That's simple enough.
So
I got to tell you,
you're going to have spy qubits, right?
So I got to tell you this, and I know we have to wrap up. I got to tell you this. So I'm not only fascinated by it, I'm going to spend the Sabbath after finishing my Sabbath reading, and this is the beginning of the holiest of the Jewish months on Sunday, because it is the month of Elul. It is the month of where we beg God for forgiveness all month and ask for forgiveness. And we celebrate the Jewish New Year and then Yom Kippur. And so we don't celebrate Yom Kippur, we atone on Yom Kippur. But you've just given me all the reading I need leading up to Yom Kippur. I am about to go on a Amazon shopping spree or research paper. My printer will be printing out massive amounts of documents because I am going to research that aspect of it.
Okay, so just you have to be conscious and aware of what you're doing as you do it. Okay, so that you don't go spend
Down
your
the
life
rabbit
becoming a quantum physicist.
I don't want to be so. I'm not coming from a quantum physicist standpoint.
So from the IT world, we want to learn how to use this technology.
Here's what I want to understand. I want to be the guy. I want to understand that how we're going to deploy the technology, and I think you've given me a fairly good understanding of it, of how the technology could be deployed, developed, and taken to the next steps. You know, and one of it, you know, that I get. My thing is, everything I've read about quantum, very similar to what originally people told me about blockchain, and I said, you have really wet dreams about blockchain. Blockchain is not going to be the do-all, end-all. Blockchain will be a tool. It'll be an app. It'll be a piece of technology that is similar to AI and machine learning, or similar to...
You apply it as needed, where it's needed.
Apply it as needed, where it's needed. Mm-hmm. It'll be no different than an Active Directory. It may even replace some Active Directories, because you'd be able to create a private blockchain and encrypt it and have different, you know, encryption keys for it, and be able to maybe create a better Active Directory through blockchain. Maybe, and I'm saying the technology isn't there yet. It can't handle the loads of information that an Active Directory can. Blockchain still can't do that. The fact is that if blockchain got better, it'd be at the level of a Visa or MasterCard system, which it's not. Blockchain couldn't handle 0.5% of the Visa transactions. It just can't.
Right. Maybe eventually. But I want to give you a little bit of historical perspective on quantum that I think will help you understand sort of a larger framework of the ideas and the inception and where we are today. So the ideas started back in the 20s when the quantum physicists were trying to figure out what's going on with an atom, right? And why do we see discrete spectra coming off of black body radiation? So then it formulated the quantum mechanics that were going on. When you took high school chemistry, you actually studied quantum because the levels of atoms are quantum based. So you were actually studying quantum chemistry to a degree. Now, was Richard Feynman, the Caltech physicist, when he was studying quantum electrodynamics, so this very low-level interplay between energy and matter and quantum, right? So he is the physicist who stated the requirements for a quantum computer. He said, for me to solve these problems, I need a quantum computer to solve quantum chemistry problems.
Okay.
Okay. So what is one of the primary applications of quantum computing? Quantum chemistry.
I have my history marching orders now. I have my reading for the month of Elul outside of my Torah readings. And I've got my marching orders so that when we reconvene.
Well, I didn't give you any orders.
No, but in my head, I got to tell you something. My brain, it is going to be so hard for me to de-brain, like just download all this entire conversation. This may be one of the only podcasts that I've ever done where I will probably listen to it 4 or 5 times. I don't typically listen to my own podcast. I'll listen to like 10 minutes of them. Kind of because it's very hard to hear yourself talking. You're your own worst judge. But this will be one of those that I will come back to, or I'll make Micah edit me out of the whole damn thing and just give me. I was like, give me the crisp pieces only. I don't know. Depends on how much work Micah's got.
I'll send you some of my favorite YouTube videos on quantum.
Please do.
That help you come up to speed. And you can link them in, yeah.
Share it with the audience. That'll be great.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say thank you for being here.
Yeah, that was my pleasure.
We're what, 2 hours in, Micah? Hour and a half? 149. This would be the longest podcast on record. Take that, Joe Rogan. Take that. Coming for your record. What's his record? Like 4 hours?
Oh, well, we can keep going if you want.
No. I think our next podcast will be like a 4 or 5 hour. Like we'll just block off a whole day.
Well, we need 2 days for the Art of War.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. I love the Art of War. I read it once a year. I read that. I read Think and Grow Rich. Like that. That is one of the books I read every single year. I've got a bunch of books here that I read every single year. That I just go through them and I read them and. It's kind of like a refresher. It's a motivational. Different parts. I always read them different, same time of year every year. But that's that. So, thank you for being here so much.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate it. For those tuning in and listening, thank you so much for being part of the conversation. There'll be a lot of stuff in the description that Micah will add for this specific podcast. If you have questions, stuff you can engage with us, obviously through our Facebook page, our LinkedIn page. You can find me on Twitter, James_Azar1. And we can obviously carry this discussion. If you're a security practitioner and you've got some quantum ideas, let's hear it. I love it.
I'm also open to anybody that wants to engage with me on R&D projects. So whether it's blockchain or quantum, and I've been doing an experiment on Meetup.com. where I have a meetup for virtual reality, where I bring people into CDC for virtual reality think tanks. And I've put up one for quantum computing.
When is it?
CDC Quantum Computing Think Tank on meetup.com.
But when do you do the meetups?
I have yet to do one because I told John McCoy at DataBank I would do the first one there.
Call John McCoy and tell him, why haven't we started working on this thing already?
So I encourage everybody to read the National Quantum Initiative. I'll send you links on some really great YouTube videos that were done. We're all waiting with bated breath for the third one, but a guy, he's done 2 really good videos to bring you up to speed on quantum. So I'm going to recommend those, and then come, as we do meetups for quantum, And, any idea that people have at this time, where we are in this time in life, with quantum opening up as it is, there are probably no bad ideas, right? It's like any idea may be, any idea may be good.
Yeah. No such thing as bad ideas.
Yeah.
Unless you tell me AI will replace human beings. Then that's just silly.
Well, there is the word artificial in there.
Right. It's artificial.
So when we come up with natural intelligence versus artificial intelligence.
Natural. NI.
All
That's
right.
it for today's episode, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening, Chris. Thank you so much
I
for being
enjoyed
here
it,
again.
yeah.
This was a lot of fun. We'll be back with more next week. Till next time, make sure you follow, subscribe, give us 5 stars so that you can be part of the fastest growing podcast in the nation. James Cesar here with Cyber Hub Engage. We'll be back next week.